I started Hello Mister at the same time that like Instagram started popping off. I really leaned into that. I think that started to kind of like build momentum of this is much more than just a magazine.
As an independent publisher, when you've been working your ass off for years and like putting everything you have, obviously all the ad dollars are going to go toward Conde.
Right.
And I'm curious like how that impacted you at the time.
Yeah. Hard.
If you could go back in time, knowing what you know now about the media landscape and where social content is and how people are building brands as creators, what would you do differently?
Probably a lot.
Today on Deep Feed, I chat with Ryan Fitzgibbon, the founder and publisher of the beloved indie magazine Hello Mister, a magazine about men who date men, which developed into a global community. In this episode, we discuss Ryan's entrepreneurial journey in independent publishing, how he was able to build such a dedicated fan base, and what ultimately drove his difficult decision to shut down the magazine. We also discuss his experience with his latest work, A Great Gay Book, Stories of Growth, Belonging, and Other Queer Possibilities, and what it represents for Ryan on a deeper level. Let's get into it. Hey Ryan, welcome to Deep Feed.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, Winter.
Yeah, so take us back to the launch of Hello Mister. What inspired you to start the magazine?
Oh gosh, that was like so long ago. It feels like yeah, I was living in San Francisco when it all went down. So I was maybe 21, I think, when moved out to San Francisco. Was working at a design firm called IDEO in Palo Alto, legendary, and had a really amazing internship, basically, that I was so fortunate to have. And I was living in the Castro and commuting down to Palo Alto and sort of like didn't have a ton of like free time, but was experiencing, you know, my newly out gay life in like Mecca of queer and gay community, and just had like an amazing household and like new, chosen family in San Francisco that like really wasn't being represented in mainstream media. So, think back to 2010, 2011. That's um, when this was all going down when I was 21. So do the math. But it was sort of the pre-marriage equality Prop 8 conversation in California. And so there was really kind of a generalized sort of conversation and media, you know, report going around just kind of touting heteronormative love is love. And it just didn't feel so connected to like the everyday experiences in life that I was having and that the friends that I was building and growing experienced. And so it was also when the iPad came out. And so obviously the conversation was all around Silicon Valley and beyond that print was dead, right? And so kind of ignoring that and kind of being like headstrong and young, I started to put together just like a loose concept for what a magazine would be, and came up with the title Hello Mister, and the tagline about men who date men, and just started a blog, like as we did, and got some friends to write for it, and then kind of like kept it dormant a little bit, was still working full time and traveling a lot. And so I didn't have much time to do it, but um, kind of like all of like perfect storm came together. And it was also the time of like Kickstarter, right? So it was like, this is how we get things off the ground in 2012 then at the time, and just put it out there as like a proof of concept, and it really like took off and people obviously seemed interested in it. So I rolled with it, and 12 years later, here we are.
Going back to 2010, 2011, why do you think queer media was so crucial at that time?
I think that for me, why it was crucial for me to get into it was because I feel like there needed innovation, in queer media. There wasn't a lot of diversity and variety on the covers of the mainstream mags, and there's a long legacy of queer fag zines and Fag Rags, and so many amazing magazines that came before, but maybe were dormant at the time or like kind of had a blip and existed in the more you know, DIY presence. And I felt strongly that I could, you know, get something onto the shelves in places like Barnes and Noble, where a lot of queer youth and, teens like myself would go looking for representation and something that looked like them, but it often wasn't there, or if it was sort of censored behind the black screen that they had on the bottom shelf of the men's interest section.
Yeah.
And so I kind of wanted to penetrate that market to begin with and sort of have uh, something that could sit alongside the GQs and, you know, details of at the time, and really represent, more everyday gay life.
Yeah. So is that why you decided to launch Hello Mister in print instead of just staying digital, was to really have that, print presence like in Barnes and Noble and brick and mortar spaces?
Yeah, my background is in graphic design. I had a BFA in graphic design, and so I think I've always been like a print nerd and excited about magazines and interested in the medium of print. But I think it was also sort of like when everyone was talking about, digital publications with the advent of the iPad coming out, it felt like, okay, but there's still space for this. And I think it's important that we get a chance to highlight our permanence and our existence in spaces that maybe we hadn't so much in mainstream ways. And so, yeah, print was also like an opportunity to be more introspective as a reader and to kind of take it out of comment sections where, there's a lot of hate just kind of like flung around from anonymous accounts and blank screens. And so it was kind of an opportunity to give people something to hold on to and to sort of sit with personally, but also connect like in physical spaces. So if you're at a coffee shop and you see someone reading your favorite magazine, or you see someone carrying around the monocle tote bag or the New Yorker tote bag, you see some sort of like brand awareness that you're connected in some way about their values. And, for this audience, like if you see it on their nightstand when you go over to hook up with them, you're automatically like have something to talk about. I hid mine. I kinda kept mine at bay so I didn't have to talk about it,
Yeah.
when I had people over, but it became a talking point for sure when it's something that's physical in print.
Yeah. So how big was the team when you first started?
It was me, honestly. I mean, you know the drill. It's kind
Yeah.
of like it's a passion project, and I had people around me that were interested in contributing and writing for it, um, and I eventually grew that, right? And like brought on an intern and eventually started making, some money through the sales of the first issue and the second issue and started to meet more people. So I moved to Brooklyn in 2013 and started meeting all kinds of interesting people that worked in, you know, publishing or media and were game to help. So I, brought people on as I could afford to, but
Yeah.
it was definitely a small and mighty venture from the start.
Yeah. I mean, financial, sustainability in independent media is notoriously challenging. What was your approach to monetization?
Yeah, I mean, can't kickstart every issue. I mean, I know
Yeah.
a lot of people do rely on the GoFundMe's and Kickstarters to get projects off the ground. But the first one that I launched in 2012, I think it garnered like 26,000 or something, which was more than enough to print the first issue and reserve some for the second. And then, you know, kind of just relied on sales for each issue over issue because I didn't have advertising in the first issue. I was kind of reluctant to have any advertisers kind of have any sway of what the content would be from the get, and eventually sort of like vetted who was let in, but also there still wasn't a lot of budget for really small niche indie magazines. And so I kind of relied on the sales and then started expanding beyond to, other verticals, our merch, started doing events and launching larger parties. I did this Hello Love Valentine's Day party every year, which was super successful and just really fun and kind of brought more of the values of what the community behind the magazine was about to the dance floor, and
Yeah.
I think that started to kind of, like, build momentum of this is much more than just a magazine, um, so it was always tricky, though, I mean, funding it, myself and trying to grow a team and keep a team sustained in New York was super challenging, and paying people, as fairly to contribute to the magazine as possible. Yeah, it was definitely over my head in many instances, like throughout the early days. So
I'm curious, what was your biggest driver of magazine sales?
I think through our newsletter and just kind of like having like a direct relationship with um, the community of readers, I did all the distribution myself for most of the magazine's life. I also got my start as a newspaper boy when I was 15, so,
Nice.
kept that theme going. But I did, I mean, I kind of, like, built relationships with bookstores all over the world and had a really long spreadsheet of the sales records and bookstores that closed and payments overdue and things that I had to write off, and, that was intense but also kind of, like, had to happen because there was a lot of places where people would just discover it, that weren't going to necessarily find it through our social media presence or, just have it upon it on the internet, um but I will say that, like, I started Hello Mister at the same time that, like, Instagram started popping
Yeah.
off and was, like, becoming a thing, and I was living in San Francisco and met some people who were working for the Instagram sort of startup early days, and I think that, like, seeing what was possible through developing community through that app and through that, like, platform, I really leaned into that and was like, "Okay, let's just, like, be a part of this, like, new thing that's building and growing an audience around essentially, like, curating your lifestyle," and that's, like, kinda part of, like, the early magazine, culture that we were a part of, like, our peers, the Kinfolks and Serials and
Yeah.
Lucky Peach were all in that same sort of, like, class of new wave of indie magazines that were alongside us, and so, um, just kinda leaned into that as, like, the early queer one in the mix and grew, like, a huge following through that, so that also just became, like, a big driver too.
Yeah, do you feel like you adapted to the early days of Instagram really easily?
I did, I think I'd kind of, like, had my, like, blinders on and kinda only stuck to that and still kind of keep my social presence, like, on the meta platforms, but I think it's such a visual magazine and, like, the magazine and this book now have so many illustrations and photographers and people who were also using these platforms to get their work out there, and so it became, like, a really seamless place to highlight visual work.
Looking back, what would you say your biggest challenges running Hello Mister were?
Honestly, just the financial implications of, like, doing a print magazine and trying to get advertisers and sustaining a team. That was that's pretty clearly to me kind of what I've said or say is the hardest part, but now kind of, like, having time to reflect on it and working on this book and thinking about the last 12 years of my life and where I'm at now and how much I've grown, I think truly the hardest part was not having enough space for my own identity and my own sense of self to exist and thrive, like, separate from the brand. I think
Mhm.
that it just became so encompassing and was like such a an intense time of my life that I was just trying to figure it out and was growing and living in my 20s and experimenting and dating like all simultaneously. It's just life. But I think I was moving so fast to try to make it happen and to try to like grow and build this brand that I didn't really give myself a lot of time to be a full person. And I think that that like is the foundation and layered across like so much of all the other challenges. But yeah, that definitely took some reflection to see.
Yeah, were there some major wins or critical moments that kind of fueled you to keep going? Because Hello Mister was started in 2013?
Hmm.
2013, and your last issue was 2019. So we know that like the grind of independent media is real. So yeah, were there some wins and critical moments that kept like pushing you forward?
So many. I think that maybe not like big kind of record breaking type of moments, but you know, starting to see our distribution expand and getting into Barnes and Noble in I think the third or fourth issue and seeing it in like my hometown and being like, this actually has reach and has spread um, was good momentum. I think working and continuing to meet incredible queer creatives that were excited by the prospect of what it could be and also motivated in their own careers and creative endeavors to like be a part of something that was also sort of had a trajectory alongside them. I mean, all of that. And then just every time I was able to like interact with readers who um, it meant something to, or that like formed a community because of it, or um, came out because of it, or learned something about themselves, like those stories really propelled me. And I used to say like were the currency that like kept me going because it wasn't a lucrative endeavor. Um, so a lot of like those little like micro moments of feeling like this is worth doing and it has impact. Because there weren't a ton of like big moments, or maybe like I got to a point too where some of those like bigger wins or like the shock of like some of the like celebrities or people that we were working with or featuring like kind of wore off, but really feeling the impact from the people that I was making it for is what it was all for anyways.
Yeah, how do you feel that you were able to grow such a big community so fast? Like, what do you think really, like, even in terms of the content you were posting or the content you were curating in the magazine, like, what was it you think that was really resonating with people?
I think it's all kind of relative too. I don't know, like it's still an indie thing. I know it was very niche and the community that loved it really loved it. There's still plenty of people that don't know that it ever existed, and maybe this book can sort of like highlight what it represented. I think, having sort of a growth alongside other talents like that we were featuring or that were being published with us for the first time, I think was a really amazing kind of leverage to be taken seriously, like not just as the publication, but kind of like the talent as well that was like a part of something bigger than them. And I think that, um, yeah, I think it also helped to be kind of one of the early like resurgence of print magazines in kind of a fashionable way, and one of the early few that were doing something queer. I think shortly after, 2014, 2015, an explosion of LGBT magazines. And even from like a mainstream perspective, we saw a lot of rebrands and redesigns with some of the titles that have been around for a while.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it was shaken up, like the dust was unsettled with the work that we were all putting out there and saying, take note because there's so much more to it. And that was really amazing to be a part of and to help push that forward.
Yeah, I think I remember back in the day, like, because we had Posture Magazine as well, and we're really pushing in that world too.
Yeah,
Um, when Condé Nast launched them, it was like a really interesting moment, I think, for me, because on the one side, it was good because it's like, oh, this is a mainstream audience, meaning there's more reach and more visibility, like, that's good for everyone,
right.
and it's about human progress and moving forward as a society, so, like, all of it is good, but then, of course, on the other side, as an independent publisher, when you've been working your ass off for years and, like, putting everything you have, obviously, all the ad dollars are
Right,
gonna go toward Condé,
right.
um, and I'm curious, like, how that impacted you at the time.
Yeah, hard. It was also, Grindr launching into and having venture capital money to really showcase queer stories, and I feel exactly the same way about kind of how important it is that, like, we all move forward and that everyone who's willing to fund queer ventures, should be doing that. I think who you're bringing along, and who you're acknowledging was part of that, uh, growth or that sort of, like, shift in people with power and money taking note and funding new projects, uh, starting to see a trend and something interesting. I think that that's where it started to become kind of feel more personally disappointing to not see my peers and my team uh, brought into those conversations. And some we were dangled in front of us, but we weren't necessarily there wasn't carry follow through. We weren't, brought all the way through seeing, some of the return on that. And so, it's all vague, I guess, but, it felt like an opportunity for me to, step aside and let the current of this trajectory that I was talking about sort of evolve and take, new form with new people at the helm. And I'm so glad that, like, I had the time and chance to do it, and that, uh, 10 issues is a huge accomplishment and felt really complete in how it sort of formed a time capsule of where we were. And so much of that is evergreen, and so much of that is still very relevant. And that's why, making a great gay book and revisiting a lot of that content, um, which made itself in the book, found its way there, just really goes to show, like, um, how important it all was in the past decade plus, um, shaped where we are at now and where, mainstream conversations are as well.
Yeah, so was that kind of the main reason that you decided it was like, when did you know it was time to be done?
I think it was as between issues 8 and 9, we did a redesign, and I kind of wanted to take a big step forward with the appearance of Hello Mister and the content and expand, um, the voices and what we were doing with each issue. And so we went from a biannual to taking skipping an issue and taking a break to redesign and put together sort of a new identity for Hello Mister, and came back with the ninth issue, with Candy Wiley, Brian Anderson, and a tribute to Ren Han on a three cover issue. Um, and really, it had weight and it felt really um, new and fresh in a lot of ways. And it was also the time when I was trying to develop relationships with advertisers and really lean into the brands and companies that were interested in supporting queer projects. And it was building so many of those relationships. And when Condé Nast and Grindr launched their um, LGBT verticals of content and their respective identities of Into and Them, of how they branded them, uh, a lot of those conversations with those advertisers dried up. And so I think that all of that work and that sort of like relationship building became clear to me that like without scale and without big numbers that I just couldn't do with an indie venture, it we weren't going to have the same kind of success or luck that I thought we could do. And so in that sort of evolution from issue 8 to 9, I was like, let's round it out with one more and go out with a bang and publish our 10th issue and sunset it from there. So, it was a lot of that. And I harp on the kind of like financials of it all, but it was also really personal. And for me, I think I needed to step back and reevaluate and be a lot more kind to myself and sort of how I was moving through a business venture when my life was also, you know, now in its 30s and had seen my 20s sort of flash before my eyes, giving so much energy to this one project and one venture, and was like, I think it's time for me to do me for a little while and see what can come next career wise. But there was kind of a lot of that happening all at once, and it didn't feel fair or right to like bring a team alongside me to figure that all out.
Yeah. How did that decision impact you?
You know, it was really difficult. I think that I had such an amazing time and so much privilege and so much opportunity afforded to me just by the position that I was in. And so, I don't want to make it all about me. And the magazine was never about me. This book is not about me. Yeah, my story sort of spans the beginning to from, 2010 when I was concepting what Hello Mister would become to now. But I think it was sort of that like realization and reality check that it had become so much about my story and um my motivations that I think yeah, were like inclusive of so many voices at the table. And my team at that point was like, you know, a lot of contractors, but expanded from 8 to 12 people at any given time. We had like a zine residency. We were doing so many different things um, that really made it feel really well rounded. But for me, I think I just needed to step aside and could have and thought about handing it over to somebody else and letting them take run with it. Was having conversations with Into and with them about what it would look like to acquire or bring parts of what we were doing alongside and fold it in. And there was interest, but there was also just like some siphoning and some like interests in what we were doing, but not necessarily who was doing it. And so that's fully fair. But, I think I lead with so much vulnerability and transparency that sometimes that just gets taken advantage of. And I think that I had a lot of learning through the ways that I was trying to keep it afloat and realized sometimes it's okay for things to be let go of and end.
Yeah. How did a big public exit, from something so important that you were doing, like, affect your relationship with social media and your personal brand? Because you had said before, kind of felt like you lost yourself a little bit. So kind of in that moment of like, okay, Hello Mister's done, like, how did that affect how you showed up um on social and like how you talked about your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think my relationship with social media is also one that is bookended by this brand. And so I joined, and became really active and started growing a small following um, when I was starting this magazine. And so it was very much tied to that. And there's so many people who are in similar situations now. I think there's a different maybe entry point to like say, an influencer launching a brand. they've already have a following for being hot, and now they're gonna launch something, and it's gonna
Right.
be their thing. Whereas, like, I think I was trying to get something off the ground and using these, platforms to get the word out there, and then it was affixed to who I was and my image on social. It's not a huge following. I don't think it's like a massively public, you know, uh, exit, but it did feel, in the relationships and community that I had built, like, uh, very like an uncomfortable pivot, I guess. And so I wanted to uh, step away from it entirely and sort of reset and sort of take some time away from New York. I left New York. I moved home with my parents actually in Michigan, and kind of was trying to figure things out, and also trying to find work, like, after being an entrepreneur for a decade, more or less. And yeah, that was a challenge too, kind of like trying to uh, fit into the boxes on LinkedIn that people expect you to have on your resume. And I didn't really look like anything that was gonna, fit the bill. And so having to really reframe, okay, what is my practice then? Like, what is the medium that I do, and what do I do best? And what parts of the magazine uh, did I love doing the most? And how can I kind of lean into those? There was a lot of like reflection on, like, yeah, personal relationships, but also my relationship to work, and how I was gonna pay the bills moving forward. Sort of using what I learned.
Yeah. So where did that take you?
Well, it took me to Michigan for a year, and I was kind of like, laying low, and figuring things out, and like freelancing and leaning back on, the graphic design skills that were rusty but still there, to take on some freelance projects, and um, you know, just keep it moving while I was figuring things out. And ultimately, after a year in Michigan, realizing like, okay, it's not going to be like as quick or as easy as I thought. This was 2019. I saw this program in Tulsa called Tulsa Remote that paid people a stipend to move and work remotely for a year. And I was like, you know what? Anywhere but here, and if I have more time and less overhead to figure it out, then great, right? So I applied for that, and in February of 2020, I moved out to Oklahoma, and I was working on a podcast myself. I was working on some things. The podcast was loosely about grief and working through endings. And it
Yeah.
was clearly my way of processing, but it was a really healthy way of doing that. I mean, I felt like I was uh, using my voice for in a different way. Because I think with the magazine too, it was, yeah, I wrote the introduction. Yeah, I had a lot of conversations and like built relationships, but an anthology, each issue was like so many, you know, talented individuals. And so this was an opportunity to, you know, do what we're doing now and sort of have conversations with people about things that um, didn't last in their lives, or maybe not all, intensely uh, hard themes to talk about, but yeah, endings. And so I was like, let me go somewhere quiet and turn down the volume, and uh, not stress about sort of paying rent every month, and worry like about what's next for me. And um, I ended up in Oklahoma a month before the pandemic started, and a lot changed after that. And yeah, we can get into it if you want.
Yeah, no, please tell me, like, what changed?
Yeah, so I, like I said, was there for about 5 weeks, 5 or 6 weeks before lockdown started, and went into it like with completely fresh eyes. I had really no context of Oklahoma. I went for a quick visit to get a vibe check, met some people, and was like, I think that this will be a good place to explore, learn, and just kind of like, you know, reevaluate. And I went to a drag brunch with a new friend on, I think it was March 15th, 2020. And the next day I woke up like covered in sweat and was like sick for the next 10 days, and lockdown started that day. So I woke up ill and found out much later, like around in late May, when I went to urgent care to get a antibody test for COVID, found out that I would actually seroconverted to HIV positive. So my first month months in Oklahoma were sort of in that version of my body converting and healing from being sick, and then having to navigate life in isolation with very small community that I had made before I sort of had to go into lockdown um, through an election year. And it was just, pretty intense, but it kind of forced me into all of the introspection and reflection that I kind of moved there to do, just in a completely different form than I thought that I would. So, yeah,
Definitely.
yeah.
So take us to the the work on this amazing book called A Great Gay Book: Stories of Growth, Belonging, and Other Queer Possibilities. Um, can you tell us like what is the concept for the book?
Yeah. I think I knew that I wanted to archive the work of Hello Mister in a form that had permanence in a way that the magazines did, but I think as a collection and as over a stretch of time, really did represent a time capsule. And having all of this space and time in Oklahoma to really reflect on what the last decade of my life was, and through the process of creating episodes for that uh, never to be heard podcast that I was working on, it was kind of pretty clear to me that the time was right to, coming up on a 10th anniversary of when I started the magazine, to represent it and to find a publisher to help me tell the stories and get it sort of further distributed than I was able to myself. Um, and so I pitched the idea for sort of like a greatest hits and new content, and expanding, the voices and the type of content that we were publishing um, in each issue, uh, to this coffee table book essentially. And Abrams, the publisher, came through and have been really amazing in helping me design and create what it is today. And I mean, it has like so many amazing contributors in it. There's 108 people listed on the back cover, and
A lot.
it's a lot of people that we published from the start, and new voices that came through. We opened as submissions as well, a call for submissions, because the magazine always had so much of that truly part of its legacy, and giving space to new voices and people who hadn't been published before. And so there's a lot of that in there. There's a couple of comics, there's a zine, there's a lot. So it is a great gay book.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And where is the best place like preferred for people to buy this book?
Oh, anywhere. I mean, yeah, you can find it at like a lot of indie bookshops. So support queer owned bookstores. Um, but yeah, there's so many places to buy it.
Yeah. Um, what is the process of working with a publisher like?
Different than doing it yourself, that's for sure. I think I came into it with a lot of ideas of what I wanted it to be. There was a pretty strong brand guidelines, um, but ultimately, you know, things work differently in the publishing world, and it's really mostly just the timelines that I wasn't familiar with, because so much of what we were doing in print in the magazine, where it was really scrappy, and we sent it to print, and 2 weeks later we had the thing. So um, we kind of worked our marketing calendars around the 2-week window that we had between like sprinting to get to the finish line and then actually, like, getting some assets together to promote it, and so this time around, like, you know, the all up, it took a little over 2 years, to put together. Obviously, there was a long runway with the content that was previously published, but, yeah, having a team that, like, championed it and had was there for, like, every step of the process and could answer questions that, like, I was still kind of unsure of doing, my own print venture was pretty incredible, so I'm grateful to have not done it all by myself.
What would you say was the hardest part about putting a great gay book together?
Well, I think logistically, the contracts of it all, I think that having done something as scrappy and, sort of DIY as a self-published magazine, there weren't as many contracts as, are required with something that's gonna be, you know, this widely spread and reprinted and turned into an audiobook and have so many different forms. Um, so working through a lot of contracts and also, like, the talent that we worked with or had published, early on up to 10 years ago, um, a lot of them are represented and have, like, people that I need to work through now and their own team uh, of folks that, like, have to have to be run through. So honestly, just getting through, like, the slog of the contracts and, like, the licenses and photo permissions, because obviously wanna make sure everyone's, like, knows what they're signing up for and feel comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Um, so logistically that, and then I think, emotionally, as I've mentioned before, just, like, the time reflecting on it all and connecting with, you know, so many people from the past. I think Hello Mister published up I think it was, like, a little under 600 people in total over the lifespan, and I didn't reach every single one of them, in the creation of this book, but revisiting so many conversations and relationships, just to kind of get everyone up to speed and see what they're working on, and, it was very time consuming, but also very rewarding to kind of see the arc of the magazine kind of come through in everyone who was a part of it.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious how you prepared for this book launch and how that may have differed from preparing for a Hello Mister, issue drop.
Yes. Well, so many different methods for preparing. I think there was, like, my own track of, like, getting, prepared and, sobering up a little bit for the tour and having some clarity and, focusing on my own kind of, like, personal routines and habits, to be clear for this whole, uh, venture. But also, yeah, I mean, just, like, getting everyone involved, um, back up to speed on when it's coming out and how they can support the work and, working with Abram's marketing team and PR team to, spread the word and get, everything out there ahead of Pride, which is, the month that this book comes out. So it's definitely a saturated one and there's a lot of, great stories to tell. And so finding space for it and, um, getting on people's radar was just, a lot of relationship building, a lot of conversations.
Yeah, like in terms of the high level strategy of getting on that radar and conversations, like what exactly does that look like? Can you give some examples?
Yeah, I mean, there was, also kind of like 2 tracks of Abrams having, like, their, team and their, like, turning on all of their contacts and getting, uh, the press release together, so I'm feeding them kind of like, uh content for the story of the book and uh, images and getting sort of like all the press get together, right, as one way, developing relationships with different like brand partnerships and trying to see if anyone's interested in doing, something bigger and buying it for their all their stores and distributing it in their hotels and things like that. There's that whole thing, which I wasn't a stranger to because I was doing that as well, like with Hello Mister in those days. Um, but then I also wanted to turn back on and reactivate the Hello Mister channels and the newsletter that we had, which was dormant for I don't know how many years, enough. And for, the social media, which was also dormant to kind of like be re-engaged and my own social media, which, you know, was a mix of personal, you know, promotion of projects, other community projects and activism that I was involved in Tulsa, but hadn't really been focused on one thing for a while. And so kind of getting clear about like how I wanted to represent and talk about this book through my platforms. Um, yeah, and really like leaning on the people who are in it to jump in and there's a lot of people in queer media and in publishing in the book, so kind of ripe for that kind of, conversation.
Yeah, and you're touring and you're doing a lot of different kinds of events. What do those events look like? Like, how are they typically structured?
Yeah, I mean, kind of in the middle of it right now, and there's more to come. I think that this book will be around forever, and so I'm sure there will be more events and a lot more conversations. Um, you know, fully like transparently, this is such an uncomfortable position because my name is on the cover, it's on the spine. It was never that prominent when I was doing Hello Mister and would take a lot more of like a behind the scenes role, and I prefer that. Um, and so now, kind of in this arena, having to be more forward and front and center is really uncomfortable and challenging because I don't want the story to be about me. You and I have like a personal connection to queer media and magazines specifically, and so it's really fun to kind of like you know um, go down the memory lane and talk about the ways that we've kind of shared and overlapped in a lot of these spaces. But in the way that press and traditional book events at bookstores and things happen, it is still very Q&A and, conversation with the author. And I didn't author this. It's a collection of so many people. And yeah, they can't be everywhere, but I'm trying to bring as many people to the different talks that we have so that there can be a salon, a reading, a cabaret, like of different performances. So, yeah, whenever possible in the cities that I'm traveling to, like bringing some contributors to join me on stage or just like to take the mic and perform their version of the work that they contributed. So, hoping to do more of that and hoping to find more ways to like sprinkle in and take other voices in press and like take more of a backseat. But I'm also very proud of it, and I put a lot of work into it. And so there's you know that kind of juxtaposition of a project that I obviously have put my whole life into and want to see do well, but also want to make sure that it's clear that like this voice isn't the only one that's important to tell.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious during the pandemic, like you have HIV, it's a lockdown, you just walked away from, the most important project of your life potentially. What was it like having to kind of go back through the archives and kind of relive a lot of Hello Mister to bring this vision to life?
I mean, it's a gift, honestly. I think that a lot of things that do end don't ever get to see the light of day again, or you never get a true process of grief, of grieving. So I feel very lucky to have even had the opportunity to revisit it all. Um, but yeah, it was very like emotionally taxing, and I also have had number of relationships throughout the course of creating Hellmister and this book. And I think that, having the support of the community that is still around me has been really crucial, and I'm so thankful for. Um, and yeah, I'm just glad to be here and to celebrate um, all that it represented and all that the growth that we've all done and the possibilities to come. I think that that's kind of what is embedded in the subtitle is that we really given the chance to grow and to belong in the places where we already exist everywhere, like what can be possible when we are actually afforded that chance to thrive and to be, authentically ourselves and to tell our stories.
I'm really curious, Ryan, if you could go back in time, knowing what you know now about the media landscape and where social content is and how people are building brands as creators, what would you do differently?
Probably a lot. Um, there's probably a lot I wouldn't do differently and wouldn't change because it is the way that it is because of how it happened. But I think I would probably treat it as more of a side hustle than a full thing that I invested everything into and kept a job, maybe for a little bit longer or maybe through the duration. I know it's possible. And I think that having maybe more parameters around, what scale and success looked like for me and for the team, I think would have been a really helpful frame of reference to really know that like what we were doing was impactful, period. Whether it could have had more impact or grown and scaled more, no doubt. But I think knowing those things, the mission was really clear. Like the values were, prominent, but having more of those conversations about like maybe this um reach is enough or it's, kind of reframing the value system, I think, in a way that maybe could have had more fun doing it. Not that I didn't have fun doing it, but I think, you know, just in the stage that I'm in life now, like I want to be doing things that really just don't feel like a chore. And some days I think it did, and I think that that was, on me. And that's just in retrospect. But ultimately, I'm so proud of the work, and I think that for it to come into a form that now represents this book, um, is is clear that there was more than enough value in its worthiness of being here forever. So
Yeah.
maybe I wouldn't change anything. I don't know. You asked.
So you would still do print.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
love that.
Yeah, we love print. I
I love
mean,
print. That's why I also did print. I
yeah,
think um I've thought about this a lot. I think about this still. And I feel like for me, for Posture Magazine, I would have launched like as a YouTube, like video, I guess like video profiles of
yeah,
artists and creatives, like going into studios and interviewing artists and like fashion designers and really just been really video heavy and been
yeah,
one of the early starters on YouTube. And like for me, I'm like, if I could go back, that's how I would launch like a modern magazine.
yeah.
So I love that. I love to hear that you're like, your answer had nothing to do with the medium. Like that
Mm,
still feels perfect and important. And I think, um, I'm seeing a lot of data around like Gen Z also love still like today, like loving print and obviously people being chronically online
right.
still love that physicality and like that experience of not looking at your screen.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, um, a dream and goal of mine would be to retire from social media after this book is, maybe, like, has completed its run, we'll
Why? Why do
see.
you want to retire from social?
Just personally, I think, like, you know, uh, yeah, life is so much more rich and real when it's real.
Yeah.
So, uh, yeah, I think that it's a really valuable tool, and it creates amazing connections and, there's a lot of value that comes from the type of information that's disseminated and shared for sure. Um, but yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, obviously, I maybe would have added more medium to what we did in print, but there's time. Look at you're doing it now, so.
Yeah. What are your where do you see yourself, 5 years? Like, what is the Ryan plan?
I've never really had one of those, and I don't know that I have one yet. Um, but I'm kind of figuring that out through the official sunsetting of Hello Mister through this book. It feels like to me, it feels like, um, a victory lap in some ways. Someone has referred to it as. Uh, and I'm kind of, you know, trying on a lot of different cities through this book tour and revisiting, relationships and forming new friendships and connections that are giving me some ideas for what's next. But, I
Can
don't
we have a sneak
I
what's next?
don't know if there's anything really clear yet. I think that, it's maybe inherent that like I will be doing something related to championing queer voices and being, connected to LGBT media in some form, um, and storytelling. But I don't know. I mean, I would love to figure some new things out. Maybe it's time to go back to school and learn something new. I started grad school right after my undergrad, and I dropped out 2 months in because I was like, I'm not ready for this. I need to go live some life.
Um, if you did go to grad school, what would you go for?
Um, I think maybe like film production, like storytelling in a way that will actually have the type of impact that I was aiming at in a different form. This can be a lot more, intimate and raw.
Um, my last question for you is about advice. You have so much experience, building a media company and with print specifically. I'm curious, what advice would you give for someone who wanted to either start and launch a book today or even like a company with a print central medium?
Yeah, I think that anyone interested in getting into print could absolutely do it. I think that knowing, kind of what the costs are and sort of being clear about like the logistics and, production of it all is definitely one side of it. But more than anything, I think having a really clear point of view on who your audience is and what you're aiming to do with the product that you're putting out in the world. I mean, at this point, there's kind of a magazine for everyone, and there's a lot of content out there, saturated market. They come and go for sure. Um, but we saw like an explosion of indie print magazines over the last decade and a lot of overlap and a lot of food mags that kind of felt like this a similar version of something that we already saw. And, you know, I think it's great that anyone who wants to start anything um, does so and like, you know, cuts their teeth by trying. So, um, just be clear about like what your goals are and like, my advice to my former self, getting started would be just to have those check-ins about like what success and impact looks like for you because it might just be making the thing and not nobody ever reading it, but you made it and that's awesome. I think that zine culture is such a personal endeavor and such an important one for so many creatives to see their ideas, come to life quickly and be able to like share that with people. So I'm all for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I am too, actually. But I would say don't go into debt. That's my biggest piece of advice
Yeah.
for print.
Hmm.
Um, find a way for sustainability, at least like what you did. Like you sell, obviously there has to be some kind of initial investment to pay for print and then and your contributors and production and everything, but like do really small runs if you can and, like, sell that
Right.
to fund the next one, right? Like, would you agree with that?
Totally.
Yeah,
Merch, events, like, I think, yeah, if you're trying to make it a lucrative thing and trying to get that off the ground, like, you definitely gotta expand beyond print. But if that's money's not the goal, then I think that there's, still value in creating the project itself. But
definitely.
yeah,
Cool. Well, that's a perfect place to end. Thank you so much, Ryan. You're obviously a huge inspiration to me and to so many people, and you've had incredible impact in the community here in New York and beyond. So thank you
I
for
appreciate
coming
that.
on to the pod.
Feelings so mutual. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to seeing you again.